What's going on, Just Hoop Talk Nation? You're with Justin Henry, Will Thompson, and today we're going to be talking player mentality with Ashley Baskerville. We're going to be going over Kyrie Irving sitting out and what that all means, talking about the trade that was and what players are dealing with when it comes to social justice here, and even just what we saw with the nation and the election. Be prepared. We got a really good episode of Just Hoop Talk. Stay tuned.
You are now tuned in to the next best thing. Justin Henry, Will Thompson.
Yeah,
Let's
y'all
go.
can talk that talk, but this is just Hoop Talk. Updates on the news, analysis who's who gon' win, who gon' lose. Is it true, is it true? This is just Hoop Talk, this is just Hoop Talk. Ball.
What is up, Just Hoop Talk Nation? We got a special episode today. Ashley, hasn't been too long, but how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely.
Yes, welcome back.
Man, we've seen a lot this early start of the season. We've covered it in depth, talked about the teams. There's been a lot going on, and one of the storylines that's kind of taken off here recently has just been the disappearance of Kyrie Irving for a while. He just went away, man. And Will and I covered it. We talked about it, and kind of had some mixed feedback there as to what Kyrie's able to do and not do. But from your aspect, being somebody who's on the sports psychology side, talk to us a little bit about what could have been going on through Kyrie Irving's mind during that time.
I think with Kyrie, he has a lot going on. He has his family issues, so family is important to him. We saw that with the birthday party that nearly cost him $1 million. We see that with just his choices, but then we knew social justice was important to him. He wanted to sit out from the bubble last season to help out. We saw he just bought George Floyd's daughter a new house. Mm-hmm. And then with the mental health, I think Kyrie is someone who everyone has their eyes on every single season. And he doesn't, I don't want to call him childish, but sometimes he needs to have those tough conversations and be more open about what's going on instead of just disappearing. But I know he's someone who is prioritizing that mental health. So, hey, if he's not right mentally, he's not going to be right on the court. So he's taking that time he needs to get right. He just can't be disappearing like that. We need to know what's happening. His team needs to know what's happening.
Yeah.
That's the crazy part. It's like nobody, unless they knew, like we were saying, unless they absolutely knew, everybody knew, and they were just playing dumb in the media, unless they knew and there was like a handshake agreement that he's going to miss a certain amount of time. I get that part. But when you're leaving the media dry, you're leaving your coach dry. He really didn't have any answers as to why he was gone. And I think it wasn't the first time we've seen Kyrie go through something like this. If it had been like a first one-off scenario, okay, maybe cool. But we've seen Kyrie kind of have media outbursts where he just doesn't talk to the media, where he went ghost really with his Cleveland teammates before the trade to Boston. And then even telling the Boston fans, like, hey, I'm here, I want to be here, and just kind of leaving them. Like, we've seen kind of Kyrie just kind of ghost everybody. And I don't know, he even talked about dismembering from the NBA when the bubble was happening on that chat. He was talking about starting his own league. Like, I don't know. When it comes to Kyrie, I'm just left with a lot of questions.
And he kind of reminds me a little bit of like Dennis Rodman, except Phil Jackson gave Dennis Rodman that freedom.
Yeah.
The coach doesn't know what's going on. And sometimes it's you got to let Kyrie be Kyrie. And other times it's we got to have a little in on what's going on. He can't just disappear.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder what's to come of this just for the future of players. Because Kyrie's a different dude. And I don't think he's the only one that's like that or the only one that's ever been like that. And I wonder if, mental health will ever be a priority for teams, or if they'll ever give players the freedom to take days off or games off or whatever, something like that. Or if it's always going to be like this situation where it's like, the hell is this dude doing? Like if he was to say, I need a few days for mental health, I know people will come down hard on him, you know what I mean? But, I don't know. I don't know if that'll ever be a thing. And I wonder if anything will ever come of this in the future.
I know the NBA is taking it a little bit more serious, especially with the way that they manage the bubble. But it's definitely a conversation that feels like it's just starting in the NBA. Like the NBA is the last of the professional leagues to even catch up to that idea of mental health. And you see it in the media. They don't get it. We were talking earlier about like Skip Bayless and his comments when people talk about their mental health, and people pick up on that when it really should be the priority.
Right.
Yeah, and it's crazy because, you know, we were kind of talking beforehand about how it's just not, how it's like not accepted. You know, it's just one of those things you don't talk about. And Kyrie's obviously trying to break the mold. He's trying to break the mold of, hey, we're not just players, we're not just pieces of properties. We have mentals to take care of. We have opinions. We have stances that we care about that are more than just basketball. And I think he's part of this next generation where it seems like they're trying to become the liberation generation, where they're able to continue playing basketball but have so much more to bring to the table than just being an athlete. And I guess the part with me that I don't agree with is just the way that things are going, that are handled. You know, the way that you do things, the way that you prepare yourself, prepare your teammates, and prepare everybody else to acknowledge what's going on. And I think that's the separation. So I don't know, is Kyrie, I know, Will, you mentioned like Kyrie is the same as a lot of other players. Do you think he's just one of those rare instances where he doesn't know how to take the media, the pressure, the stability as a teammate? Or you think there's a lot more players that truly act like that but have been molded into this based on you need to be professional, you need to be a player, you'll lose game checks?
Yeah. I think Kyrie is one of the rare people that just does not care about the results of whatever he decides to do, right? Like, he did not care, bro. Like, he got a lot of pushback or whatever, but he came back and put up 20-something shots, you know what I mean? Like, he does not care. And I think the interesting part, I don't know if there's a system set up for them to take time off for things like that. So most players are a little afraid. Like, they'd be afraid to say something like that, or there's no way for them to you know, communicate that. So maybe, you know, I don't know. I'm sure a lot of players would love to do what Kyrie did, but they're probably afraid to. And Kyrie, I don't think he cares at all, man. I really don't. I think that's what's different about Kyrie.
Yeah, you see a lot of like personal reasons this year too. This year specifically,
that's true. That's true.
A lot of players missing time for personal reasons. Ashley, you think that's because of potentially mental health, the bubble, COVID, just everything that's going on, or do you think that, you know, like there's a correlation with that?
I think it's a little bit of all of it. I think what 2020 taught people is what's important, right? We all went through some level of isolation. Even the bubble was really, really hard on players mentally, being stuck away from their families, and they were able to see, hey, that's probably what's most important. People are taking that time off. I think the season's also a little bit more compact, it feels like they're playing all the time. And so it's building up. And like you mentioned, Kyrie needs to be able to have those conversations. That's part of being a leader, saying like, hey, this is what I'm going to do, because it breaks trust with your team when you're not there for them. And I'm sure there's a lot of players who are like, man, I wish I could take more time off. Man, I wish I could go home for this. And they're not at a Kyrie level. They're not an all-star. They're not a champion. They're not, you know, looked at like him, so they don't feel that they have the right to.
No, that's a hell of a point. And there's a lot of people going through things. They're going through losses. They're going through just hardships in general right now at this time. And even just kind of reflecting, obviously, one of the reasons that Kyrie missed time that's been reported in the media was due to the attacks on the Capitol. And, you know, obviously some of the other social justice matters that are going into this and thinking about that in a bigger scope. A lot of players are dealing with that right now. We saw Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown really take an active stance early on. Obviously, a lot of those Milwaukee Bucks players, you saw George Hill from the Thunder really take an active approach to this as well. What are some of your thoughts on just overall what the players are going through? Because we saw it in the bubble. We saw the impact. We knew that it was keeping those players with a heavy heart, and it's still extending even to now. Like, what are your thoughts overall on just the social justice impact on their mental health?
I'm first off glad they're doing it. They have the platform to have their voices heard, and they're utilizing it. I think for them, it's people don't realize that they're still people. They're still human beings. When they're not in uniform, especially, a lot of them aren't recognized as these huge NBA stars, and they still have those run-ins with the law. They still have prejudice and racism. And so it's something that's personally meaningful for a lot of them. And so people forget that just because you have money, you're not protected from racism. So the fact that they're being able to speak out, I mean, we look at LeBron James, he had the N-word painted across his house. You don't think that has an impact on how he goes out and plays mentally? Because they look at him as property, essentially. They look at athletes as you play, you make money, and that's it. I think now that they're out of the bubble, there's a little bit more pressure for them to continue it and less protection. When they were in the bubble, they were isolated from everything else, and now they have to step up. And I'm really glad. It's pretty cool. Even my brother owns a brewery out of San Antonio, and he started something called Black is Beautiful. And over 1,200 breweries across the world have participated, and a lot of NBA players have even been reaching out to him like, hey, how can we help? What can we do?
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. And it's cool to see everybody fighting for that too, and still able to play too. You know, I don't feel like, I think that's the worry from a lot of fans, is that if you're focused on activism or making a difference, it'll affect the level of your play. And a lot of the guys that are fighting, you know, you're talking about LeBron, they play at a higher level, or they're still playing at the same elite level. And it's crazy to think that people think that you can only play sports and you can't play a part anywhere else. And I think today more than ever, we're able to see that that's not true.
I think even when we look at some of the greatest athletes of all time, you know, with One Night in Miami just coming out, thinking Muhammad Ali, his whole career was based upon that.
Yeah.
And he's the greatest. And I think it puts a pressure on them to perform at a higher level because of that. People are like, oh, you can't do both. And they have to show you, I can do both. I can compartmentalize this while I'm playing, as long as you let me talk about it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of strong leaders in those locker rooms too. You think you go to Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich, Doc Rivers. You're starting to hear a lot of extra voices in there too, and it's good. I feel like those locker room conversations not only bring out you know, just the overall social justice component, but it is good for mental health, and it's good to have other leaders in there who are able to say, hey, if you have a voice or you have a concern, let's talk about it. Let's all get on the same page. Let's hear different sides. You see, like Myers Leonard in Miami was one of the only players to stand up during the national anthem, but he had his story. He had his side, and had those conversations not been in place, it might have just been, oh, he wants to be different, or he's just not with us, you know?
Yeah, I think that's huge, especially with the coaches. The coaches are leading this dialogue, especially the three that you mentioned. They are some of the most vocal people probably in the NBA. And I think for the players, it's good because they're realizing, especially with coaches like Steve Kerr and Coach Pop, who didn't live through these experiences, they know that they have their back. And all that does is build trust in them. They're going to be more likely to do what they want at a higher level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you talk about locker rooms, obviously we talked about Kyrie early on, and we saw a huge trade in the NBA, one of the biggest that we've seen in recent memory. James Harden going to the Nets on a team already stacked with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. And obviously we have you in here talking sports psychology, talking mentality. Harden was the best player on his team for a very long time. And we saw that he already didn't like playing second fiddle when he was on OKC the first time with Russ and with KD. Now he's going to the Brooklyn Nets, playing with Kyrie, playing with KD, and will probably have to take a lesser role. What's it like for a player like that, who many consider to be a quote-unquote alpha in the room? He's the barking personality, the dominant figure on his team, to go play almost second, maybe third fiddle with guys like Kyrie and KD?
It's going to be a process for him. We know that James Harden likes his way. And so it's going to be a process for him, and he's going to have to decide, do I want to lead or do I want to win? Because sometimes when you're pushing and pushing and pushing, that's not doing anything for the team. And we see that. That's part of the reason he wanted to leave. It wasn't working. And so he's going to have to find his role and get comfortable in his role and stay in his role. You know, KD is used to that now, coming from the Warriors. He wasn't the leader, even, which is crazy to say.
Yeah.
Kevin Durant's not a leader on the team, but he wasn't in that situation. He had to be behind Clay and behind Steph. And so I think hopefully he can talk to Harden about that. But if Kyrie keeps disappearing, maybe he will be the on the team.
It's crazy because, like, you would think that Harden, like, you think he's going to come on the team and be the best player, but there's no way that KD and Durant, they obviously paired up for that reason. So they could play together. It could be their team. They could win championships. And now that Harden's there, it's almost like he's the odd piece. And Will, you mentioned this too. You were like, I think it would work if it was just Harden and KD, or just Kyrie and Harden, or just Kyrie and KD. But meshing all these three together, bro, like, I don't know. What's your thoughts on it all?
I think the interesting thing is, like, I feel like guys can change their playing style a little bit and they can adjust their playing style. But I think what's scary about them is their personalities, you know? And, like, can those personalities ever mesh and come together? Because, you know, like we've seen Harden take less shots now, you know, Kyrie could potentially take less shots, but the real question is, are they willing to accept a lesser role or feel like they're a lesser voice in the locker room, or just, you know, will that all mesh and make sense? I think that's where the real challenge is. And that's where Steve Kerr is going to have to like work some magic and make it make sense and make it all, make it all make sense as a unit, really.
Yeah, and Ashley, you mentioned, you know, being the leader in the room and how Kevin Durant isn't that. That's the part to me that's intriguing about this whole relationship, because KD is not considered, you know, the alpha male personality, if you quote unquote. I think he's the best player on the team, obviously, but he's not that personality. And Kyrie's, I think at times can be a little of both. He's willing to defer at times, but then also he's willing to play lead dog. He wants to be lead dog. And then James Harden obviously is having none of the other side. He wants to be the main player. But it seems like they're almost all in reverse roles, where KD is going to be the best player and is probably going to be looked at as, from his teammates, as like, this is his team. He's the leader. Yeah. And Harden's going to be looked at as like, you are an accessory to this championship. You think that's going to have a lasting effect on their relationship, their way they play? Like, because there's going to be a time where Harden pushes. And when you have alpha beta personalities, a lot of times the alpha kind of just presses their way.
I think there might be some tension initially, especially like knowing how Harden left and all the rumors of that. We know he can rock a locker room. We know he pushes buttons, and we know he doesn't have a filter. So I know it's going to be hard to adjust, but him having rapport and like having a relationship already playing with KD, I think KD is going to be able to be like, no, you know, we know KD can be a leader. We know that. We just also know that he's one of the players that doesn't mind stepping back and playing a role, because he knows he knows he's one of the best. He knows that he's going to show up continually. So I don't have to like showboat. You know, I'm going to get my stats. And so I think he'll be able to have that conversation, hopefully, with Harden. Like, it's not your team, bro. Like, it's not. And that's part of the reason you're here. And you're either going to have to play a role, or it's just not going to work. We're not going to be successful.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the real kind of interesting part will be James Harden and Kyrie and how they make that work, right? Because we've seen James Harden kind of playing point guard a majority of the time since he's been on the court, and he's dictating when KD gets the ball. He's dictating when Kyrie gets the ball. And so far it hasn't blown up, but that's something that has potential to blow up anytime, you know?
And maybe it's good for Harden in the long run, because he's so used to having to dominate and run everything. Now he has players like teammates that hopefully he'll trust. He knows that they'll show up continually. So he can afford to take that step back, versus if he's in a situation where he's not sure about his teammates. He's not sure what they're going to do. So hopefully he fits into that and starts to realize like, hey, we all have to play our role here. We all have to get in line. It's going to be interesting to see what Nash does about it.
Yeah, that's the big part to me. You know, outside of keeping Harden out the strip clubs, I think it's a big component is the coaching aspect. The best wings, right? the coaching component to me is so interesting, because you have a rookie coach. Like, Steve Nash has not been this is his first time coaching, and yes, he has some NBA experience with D'Antoni obviously there, but to me, how he handles this, like going through an entire season. I know that we're going to see some struggles from this team at some point. Obviously, when, you know, the first couple games together, we saw that. But if there's a bubble scenario or an extended playoff scenario, and we have these guys fighting, I think that's the key component is how can, you know, we talked about the strong leaders in the locker rooms with Pop and Rivers, but keeping these guys' mental all together, to me, is going to be the biggest factor. And I'm not sure if Steve Nash, I don't know him in that locker room very well, but I don't know how he's going to be able to do that.
I hope he'll be able to give some advice, especially when we're talking about Harden being able to take a back seat. He was the leader on the Suns for so long and then had to take a back seat to Kobe. So he has that experience, and maybe he can give that. But I think it might definitely test him as a first-year rookie coach. It's gonna It's going to make him decide if he wants to keep doing this.
And do you think, honestly, in these locker rooms, and you probably have heard, or you probably know a little bit more insight than us on that, in these locker rooms, is there a big hassle when it comes to like alpha versus beta, best player versus role player? Like, is there a lot of that affects these players? Because one team to me that has really embraced this is the Los Angeles Clippers. Obviously the Lakers too, where you have different personalities, but different talent levels. And both of the top players are like different personality types, but they've accepted their roles and they're both thriving. Like, do you think that's a problem in locker rooms, or it's just something that's addressed beforehand and taken care of?
It depends why you're there. Are you there for your stats, for your all-stars, for your MVP, or are you there to win? And as long as they're all there for the same reason, it's usually not a problem. It's when ego gets in the way, and sometimes people have a hard time putting the ego away. We know, especially with like the Lakers, you're looking at players who, they have an ego, but they're used to being able to put that aside. Mm-hmm. They know that, hey, I can't do this by myself, so I need to share the spotlight, and you see that success. We've never seen LeBron win by himself, right? We've never seen AD win by himself. And so they know that they need to take that break and take that space.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I mean, just talking a little bit about the season, how much have you been watching? Have you been watching a lot of the early season and getting to see some of these teams?
I've been watching my Lakers, but that's about it. I need to get into it. I have a really hard time balancing football season and basketball season. So once football's over, I can make that switch over.
Almost there. All we do is talk hoop on this one, so we're not going to talk about any of the playoff stuff that's going on right now. The Lakers look good. I feel like after the bubble, a lot of people were talking about it, going through a playoff run, a bubble run, and the mental note that it would take on them this season. A lot of assumed rest days were supposed to be here, and then even the condensed games in the back-to-backs. Have you been impressed with the way that the Lakers have handled it? Because LeBron's not missing games. AD's not really missing a whole lot of games either.
I have been really impressed. They're handling it. They're doing it. We know that they are definitely prioritizing taking care of their body, recovering, paying. We know LeBron puts out a lot of money in recovery every year, every season. And so they're able to show up consistently, and that's what they need to do. We'll see what happens as we continue down this season. We know they're going to make the playoffs, maybe back to back, but champion, fingers crossed.
I'm there with you.
But hopefully it'll be able to stay consistent and injury-free, most importantly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think what's really impressive with the Lakers is what the other teams that made deep runs in the bubble have done so far this year. Pretty much everyone else has struggled, And so that's what's really impressive. The Heat are like barely in the playoffs right now, barely above 500. They might be below 500. Nuggets have struggled. The Celtics are, they're playing well, but they're not playing great. Raptors, yeah, absolutely. So that's what's really impressive about the Lakers. To do what they did and come back and still dominate the league is crazy.
And manage COVID in one of the worst cities.
Yeah, that's true.
Good point. Yeah,
that's what's eating a lot of them up is they're not even able to keep enough players eligible to play.
Yeah.
A lot of these guys, I guess before we get off, I want to talk about that too. What's your thought about these players? Because they're going through this season, obviously, and there's so many other things going on outside of just basketball, outside of a condensed schedule, just the COVID factor. There's so much more testing going on now. There's a lot more responsibility on these players to do the right thing, to mask up, to socially distance. Otherwise, it costs their whole team. We're seeing a lot of players getting the contact tracing where they'll have to sit out for multiple games. What's your thoughts on these players and what they're going through right now? Because a lot of them just want to be out the same way we do. They want to be out, be able to go shopping, be able to go to a restaurant, go to different cities and enjoy the nightlife. Like, I don't know.
I think it's rough on them. I mean, just like you mentioned, for all of us, it's hard being at home as well. For them, a lot of them can't even go see their families now. We see, like we mentioned earlier with Kyrie, it cost him almost $1 million to throw his family a birthday party. Or you see Karl Towns, who lost 7 family members last year to COVID and then tested positive. And so that type of stress is on them as well. And if if they're not prioritizing their mental health, they're not prioritizing recovery, you're going to see a lot more people getting injured because it's just too much happening at once. And so I think it's important that they still have people to reach out to. They still have people to talk to. If they can fly their families in when they can, because it is a lot. And I know, especially like you think about Toronto, the Raptors, they're not even playing at home. They're playing in Tampa.
Yeah,
so
crazy.
They're further away than they normally would be. They're not even in the same country they would normally play in.
Yeah, that's a hell of a point too. Yeah, you start to think about that and just what they're going through, the amount of travel, the amount of health precautions, probably getting the thing up your nose all the time. It's just a lot, it's a lot to take in. Thinking about potentially another bubble scenario too, which we talked about last time you were on, thinking about that and leaving your families again for an unexpected period of time. Who knows what's in store for the rest of this season? They got the break. Hopefully that reset. There's like a little 2-week reset. So hopefully that gives the players a chance to reboot and get it right, man. But we'll see. Hopefully things are opened up by then, vaccines out, and we're talking about a whole different mental health conversation from there.
Hopefully. Fingers
Ashley,
crossed. I'm over it.
Yeah, all of us, man.
I miss seeing sports live and in person.
In person one time, man. Like that's
right.
Fun. Ashley, great as always. Ashley Baskerville with Ab Mentality. Thank you for coming on. We got to do a segment or something with you. Have you on more frequently. Get you on shows.
We need that. Yeah.
So, let's do it.
Absolutely. This is great as always. Thank you for coming on. As always, Just Hoop Talk, another edition in the books. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Just Hoop Talk, we're out.